The illusion of caring. There is a moment in every life where you look back and realize just how much of yourself you gave away. The laughter that wasn't returned. The tears you cried in secret. The nights you stayed awake replaying words that someone else forgot the moment they said them. You carried weight that wasn't yours. You cared more than anyone asked you to, more than anyone deserved, and somewhere along the way you began to confuse that pain for love. You thought if you cared enough, if you gave enough, if you sacrificed enough, someone would finally see you. But the truth is crueler than that, because caring has always been the easiest way to lose yourself. From the moment you were young, they taught you that love meant surrender, that being soft meant being good, that giving yourself away was noble, holy, the very proof that you were alive. You were praised when you put others first. You were rewarded when you stayed quiet, when you smiled even as you bled. And slowly, you learned the unspoken law of existence. The more you care, the more they take. It starts small. A teacher's disappointed look, a parent's silence, a friend's rejection, and each time you bend to make it right, each time you run to explain, each time you ache to be understood, you hand over a piece of yourself. Until one day you wake up, and you're not even sure who you are anymore, only who they needed you to be. And here lies the first betrayal. Because they don't need to hurt you to break you. They only need to make you care. Every reaction you give, every flinch, every apology, every desperate "please understand me" is a signal. It tells them where you are weak. It maps your heart for their convenience. And they don't even have to be cruel. They only need to push gently, and you will bend, you will fold, you will break yourself just to keep the peace. Because you thought peace was proof of love. Because you thought silence meant safety. But what if I told you it was never love? What if I told you it was a trap? The trap is this. Caring becomes a leash. The more you attach, the more you serve. The more you explain, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. You thought your kindness made you human. But to them, it only made you usable. You thought your empathy was a gift. But to them, it was only an open door. You thought explaining yourself would finally earn you understanding. But to them, it was nothing more than proof of your weakness. And the worst part? You began to believe it. You began to believe that being liked was more important than being respected. That harmony was worth more than your self-worth. That being chosen mattered more than being whole. And so you softened yourself until you disappeared. You bent until you broke. You became the very thing they wanted, predictable, readable, controllable. But here is the truth. Predictability is the graveyard of power. Every time they could guess your reaction, every time they knew exactly what words would pierce you, every time they saw your desperate scramble to explain, your power slipped away. They owned you, not with chains, not with force, but with the invisible strings of your own emotions. And so comes the moment of revelation. You stop. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop offering pieces of yourself to those who never earned them. You stop being their echo, their puppet, their predictable source of comfort. At first, it feels like death. Silence always does. That moment where you choose not to answer, not to explain, not to beg, it burns. It feels unnatural, almost unbearable, like the whole world will collapse if you do not fill it with your words. But then you notice something. The collapse doesn't come from you. It comes from them. Because people are addicted to signals. They rely on your emotional broadcasts to measure their control. They feed on your apologies, your explanations, your desperate attempts to keep the peace. And when you give them nothing, when you stare calmly into the storm and say nothing, they panic. They project. They spiral. They unravel. They never feared your anger. They feared your indifference. Indifference is what shakes their foundation. It is the silence that drowns them, the mirror that reflects back their own emptiness. Because when you care, they own you. But when you stop caring, truly stop, you become untouchable. This is not cruelty. This is not hatred. This is not revenge. This is clarity. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop serving, the moment you stop caring beyond what is deserved, you shift from prey to predator. Not because you destroy them, but because you no longer allow them to destroy you. It is here, in this stillness, that you finally begin to see. You see that your silence is not weakness, it is power. You see that your absence speaks louder than all the words you wasted before. You see that what they miss is not you, but the control they once had over you. You see that what they called love was often dependency, and what you called care was often servitude. And in this silence, in this refusal to bend, you become someone new, someone stronger, someone whole, the one who no longer explains, the one who no longer begs, the one who no longer believes that being understood is worth losing yourself, the one who finally realizes the most dangerous thing you can give them is not your anger. It is your absence. And once you taste this truth, this fierce, aching freedom, you will never go back. The weight of silence. There is a kind of silence that terrifies you the first time you feel it. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of sleep, but the silence that follows when you finally refuse to explain yourself. The silence after their accusation. The silence after their disappointment. The silence after they push you, bait you, provoke you, and you say nothing. It feels unnatural, almost violent. Every part of you wants to defend your name, to explain your truth, to correct the story they are weaving about you. Your chest tightens, your tongue burns, your thoughts scream, and yet nothing leaves your mouth. And in that moment, something begins to shift. Because silence isn't emptiness. Silence is a verdict. For your whole life, you were trained to believe that clarity is strength. That if people misunderstood you, you had to explain yourself. That if someone accused you, you had to defend yourself. That if someone hurt you, you had to show them how deeply they cut. And yet, every time you did, you tightened your own leash. They didn't need to be right. They only needed you to prove that you cared. That's the trap. That's the hook. They survive on your reaction. The louder they accuse, the more desperate you become to answer. The more you explain, the more they know exactly which words twist deepest. And so, they keep twisting. Not because they seek truth, but because they seek control. And then one day, you stopped. You stopped correcting their assumptions. You stopped defending your story. You stopped flinching at their lies. And suddenly, their grip loosened. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you refused to prove them anything at all. At first, they don't understand. They push harder. They speak louder. They try every trick they've ever used to pull you back into the game. Public shaming, private guilt, sharper tones, louder accusations. But nothing works, because silence is not absence. Silence is starvation. You're not refusing to play because you're weak. You're refusing to play because you've seen the game for what it is. And here's the secret they'll never admit. They don't actually want the truth. They want your attention. They want your reaction. They want the pleasure of knowing they can still move you. And when you stop moving, when your face stays calm, when your body doesn't flinch, when your words don't come, their entire illusion begins to fall apart. Because now the script has no actor. They talk, and you do not answer. They accuse, and you do not defend. They provoke, and you do not rise. And the longer the silence stretches, the more their desperation shows. Their calm cracks. Their words stumble. Their voices rise. Their masks slip. And in the stillness of your silence, they reveal themselves more than you ever could have exposed with words. This is the brutal clarity of detachment. The less you speak, the more they unravel. And yet, silence is not easy. It is not gentle. It is not soft. It feels, at first, like tearing a piece of yourself away. Because silence means letting them think what they want. It means letting them believe the lie. It means letting your name be dragged without chasing it. And that feels unbearable until you realize it doesn't matter. Because you no longer need to win. And when you no longer need to win, they can no longer make you lose. Silence isn't defeat. Silence is refusal. And that refusal is a kind of power they cannot touch. The world is addicted to noise. Everyone is performing, defending, explaining, justifying, begging to be seen, to be understood, to be validated. And in that chaos of noise, the one who is silent becomes terrifying. Because silence doesn't give them anything to grab onto. Silence doesn't give them the satisfaction of knowing you're still playing. Silence leaves them stranded, screaming into a void that will never echo back. And that is where the balance shifts. They will call you cold. They will call you arrogant. They will call you cruel. But those are not truths. They are confessions. They are proof that they no longer hold the leash. That your silence has cut through the strings they once pulled with ease. And though it hurts, though the weight of not being understood feels like carrying a stone in your chest, you begin to see something. Silence does not weaken you. Silence protects you. Every word you withhold preserves your leverage. Every still breath you take keeps your strength intact. Every refusal to explain reminds them they no longer have access to you. And the truth is, they were never afraid of your anger. They were afraid of your absence. Because anger is still engagement. Anger is still attention. Anger still says, "You matter enough to move me." But silence? Silence says, "You are irrelevant now." And that is unbearable to those who feed on your care. So you stay still. You let them scream. You let them twist. You let them write their stories. You let them perform for an audience that no longer includes you. And slowly, their own performance devours them. Because silence isn't empty. Silence is a mirror. And when you stop reacting, they are forced to look at themselves. That is why silence is not just a tactic. It is revelation. It is the knife that severs their control. It is the clarity that frees you from their illusions. It is the reminder that you don't need to be understood to be strong. You don't need to defend what doesn't need defending. You don't need to chase what was never meant to stay. And as you sit in that silence, as your heart grows steady in its stillness, you realize something powerful. The most terrifying thing you can give is not your anger. It is your absence. Because silence, when chosen with intention, is not emptiness. It is power. It is dignity. It is freedom. The collapse of control. There comes a day when you finally stop trying to fix them. It doesn't happen with thunder or fire. It doesn't come with screaming or rage. It happens quietly, in the stillness of a single choice. You stop interfering. You stop softening the blow. You stop holding up the scaffolding of someone else's chaos. And for the first time, you see what happens when you remove your hands from the weight you were never meant to carry. And the truth is brutal. When you stop holding, they fall. For so long, you believe that effort was power. That if you just tried harder, explained more carefully, loved more deeply, you could save them. You could fix them. You could finally turn the mess into meaning. And so you poured yourself out, piece by piece, thinking your love could patch the holes they refused to mend. But now you see it for what it was, not power, but theater. You weren't saving them. You were only protecting them from the consequences of themselves. You weren't changing them. You were only delaying the collapse they were destined for. You weren't loving them. You were shielding them from truth. And truth, left alone, is merciless. Because the moment you step back, the moment you stop filling the silence with comfort, the moment you stop stitching their wounds while they tear them open again, the structure crumbles. The lies no longer hold. The masks begin to crack. The chaos you once absorbed, managed, explained away, now it spills into the open. And you realize, this was always there. You just never let yourself see it. That's what caring beyond your reach does. It blinds you. You thought your control would save them. But your control was only fear in disguise. Fear of losing them. Fear of being alone. Fear of discovering that your love was never enough. And so you tried harder, gave more, stayed longer. Not because they deserved it, but because you couldn't face the truth of letting go. But when you finally do, when you finally let the silence replace the pleading, you inherit something greater than control. You inherit the truth. And the truth is this: they never wanted to change. They only wanted you to carry the burden of trying. Every time you explained their behavior, you gave them one more reason to stay the same. Every time you fought for their potential, you gave them permission to remain who they were. Because why grow when someone else is carrying the consequences? Why rise when someone else cushions the fall? Your care wasn't power, it was permission. And when you finally stop giving that permission, the mask falls fast. They provoke you, waiting for the familiar flinch. They collapse, waiting for the familiar rescue. They spiral, waiting for the familiar forgiveness. But it doesn't come. Not this time. Not anymore. And so they unravel. Not because you broke them, but because without your emotional scaffolding, they can no longer hide their emptiness. At first, it feels cruel. You hear the voices in your own head. You should have helped. You should have explained. You should have held them just one more time. But then you remember the 1,000 times you already did. The nights you held them together while no one held you. The arguments you absorbed in silence. The guilt you carried that was never yours. And you realize, this is not cruelty. This is revelation. Because when you stop saving them, you see who they really are. The ones who valued you will stay steady. They will meet your silence with quiet respect. They will reach without force, without guilt, without drama. But the others, the ones who fed on your reactions, who thrived on your explanations, they implode. They were never stable. They only stood because you held them up. And now that you've stopped, their collapse isn't your failure. It's their truth. That is the savage piece of detachment. You don't scream. You don't warn. You don't explain. You watch. You observe. You let the chaos they created finally consume them, and you understand. This is what freedom looks like. Because freedom isn't beautiful. It's brutal. It tears away your illusions. It forces you to accept that you never had control, only the illusion of it. That people don't change because you carry their weight. They change when they choose to. Or they don't. And either way, it was never yours to decide. That's the revelation. You never saved them. You only delayed their fall. And now, in your stillness, you finally see your silence was not abandonment. It was the truth showing itself. The world will call you cold. They'll call you heartless. They'll say you gave up. But what they will never see are the invisible battles you already fought, the countless times you bent until you broke, the nights you bled for people who never noticed. They will never see how much you gave before you stopped giving. But you know, and knowing is enough, because silence doesn't just starve them. Silence heals you. For the first time, you don't need to chase their approval. For the first time, you don't need to carry their guilt. For the first time, you don't need to explain why you stopped caring. You stop saving people who refuse to save themselves. And in that refusal, you finally save yourself. The cost of letting go. No one tells you how much detachment hurts. They speak of freedom as if it is light, effortless, a kind of soaring into clarity. But the truth is harsher. Freedom does not arrive wrapped in peace. Freedom demands loss. Freedom tears away what you thought you could not live without. And in the silence of that tearing, part of you feels like it is dying. At first, it feels like something inside you is being cut away piece by piece. Not all at once, but slowly, like blood leaving your veins, like a limb losing circulation. The warmth fades. The familiar ache of caring fades. The desperate urgency to be understood fades. And when it is gone, you feel cold. Hollow, as though something essential has been stolen from you. But nothing has been stolen. You are the one who let it go. You let go of the version of yourself that begged to be chosen. You let go of the voice inside you that screamed to be seen. You let go of the endless need to explain yourself to people who are never listening. And though it feels like death, what you are really burying is the weakest part of you, the part that made you a prisoner. This is the cruelty of growth. It feels like abandonment, but it is liberation. You sit in silence, and it screams at first. The emptiness echoes like a wound. You hear the lies they told about you, and you say nothing. You hear their provocations, and you remain still. You hear their desperate rewriting of your story, and you do not defend it. And in that restraint, your old self, the one that thrived on noise, on explanations, on desperate validation, writhes in pain. It begs you to scream, to fight, to prove yourself. But you don't, because the stronger self rising inside you knows better. It knows that explanations never saved you, that apologies never freed you, that bending, softening, breaking yourself into smaller pieces never earned you love. It only earned you exhaustion. And so, for the first time, you silence the weaker voice. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it no longer deserves to rule you. And that silence feels like betrayal. But it isn't. It is discipline. Because every time you refuse to react, you are not betraying yourself. You are betraying the illusion of yourself, the one who thought care could buy respect, the one who thought noise could prove worth, the one who thought effort could rewrite someone else's nature. That version of you must die, so the truer one can live. And so the silence sharpens. The longer you sit in it, the clearer it becomes. You no longer chase closure. You no longer wait for apologies. You no longer demand to be understood. You laugh, bitterly at first, then freely at the thought that anyone ever owed you anything. Because they don't. No one owes you understanding. No one owes you kindness. No one owes you truth. And you owe them even less. That realization is painful, but is also the threshold. Because once you cross it, there is no going back. You stop chasing people who never clapped for you. You stop bleeding for people who never noticed. You stop apologizing for being human, for needing, for breaking, for caring. And you see, with sharp clarity, just how much of your life was spent performing for people who weren't even watching. And the pain of that realization, it cuts deep. But inside the wound, freedom grows. Solitude becomes a mirror. You sit in it, and it reflects back everything you once drowned in noise. The fragile friendships, the shallow approval, the compulsive need to be validated. At first, the silence of solitude feels like punishment. But slowly, it turns to precision. The fewer voices around you, the clearer your own becomes. And clarity has always been terrifying, because clarity strips you of excuses. It forces you to see who is truly loyal and who is merely feeding. It shows you the fragility of the connections you once mistook for love. It reveals the truth that most of what you carried was never yours. And yet, in that same clarity, you feel lighter, stronger, untouchable. They will call you cold. They will whisper, "You've changed." And they will be right. You are no longer bending. You are no longer breaking yourself into digestible pieces. You are no longer emotionally available on demand. And because of that, they panic. Not because you are cruel, but because your absence is louder than your presence ever was. They don't miss you. They miss the control they had over you. They don't crave your love. They crave your emotional servitude. And when it is gone, they don't feel your cruelty. They feel their own emptiness. That is the hidden cruelty of growth. It reveals who cannot evolve with you. And you no longer chase their understanding. You no longer need them to see your heart. You no longer beg to be seen. All you need from them now is distance. Because the ones who mattered will remain without demand, without guilt, without manipulation. And the ones who leave were never meant to stay. So you let them. And the letting go feels brutal, but it is the only silence that builds. You don't justify your absence. You don't explain your detachment. You don't prove your worth anymore. Because worth doesn't need proof. It never did. And in this space, only the strong remain. Not because you held them, but because you didn't. That is the price of freedom, the death of the illusion that people care the way you did. The realization that much of what you called love was dependency, and much of what you called connection was control. But it is also the beginning of power. The kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't break when misunderstood. The kind of power that does not need permission. The kind of power that no longer bleeds for approval. And once you taste that power, quiet, sharp, unshakable, you will never return to who you were. Because the one who no longer explains, no longer defends, no longer needs to be understood, that one is free. The untouchable silence. There comes a point where the world can no longer touch you. It doesn't happen because you built walls. It doesn't happen because you became bitter. It happens because you finally understood. The one who does not care cannot be controlled. For so long, you lived in the economy of reaction. Every word they spoke pulled you. Every insult bent you. Every guilt trip rewrote your choices. You thought if you just explained better, defended harder, stayed softer, they would finally understand. But the truth was never about understanding. The truth was always about control. And now you've stepped outside of it. You no longer bargain with your worth. You no longer sell your silence for their approval. You no longer buy their guilt with your apologies. You are out of the market, detached, free, and the shift is terrifying to them. Because what they crave is not your love, it is your reaction. What they miss is not your presence, it is the control they once had over your presence. They scream louder, twist sharper, bait harder. They manufacture crises, desperate for the flinch that once kept them fed. But nothing comes. Because you finally understood the most dangerous weapon in the world is not fire. It is stone. They want your reaction. You give them nothing. They want your explanation. You give them silence. They want to pull you back into the storm. But there is nothing left to pull. And so the game collapses. Because every relationship built on manipulation dies when reaction disappears. Withdrawal does not create chaos. Withdrawal reveals it. The cracks that were always there begin to split. The dependency that was always hidden begins to show. The mask they wore begins to slip. And you see, with cold clarity, that they were never stable. They only stood because you kept holding them up. Now, without your scaffolding, they collapse. They accuse you of cruelty. They paint you as the villain. They whisper that you abandoned them. But you know the truth. You were never their savior. You were their fuel, and the moment you stopped feeding them, the fire went out. And in that moment, you realize something unshakable. You don't need to save anyone. You don't need to explain your absence. You don't need to justify your silence. Because silence itself is justification enough. Every reaction is a confession. And now, you're the interrogator without speaking a word. The louder they get, the weaker they appear. The quieter you remain, the stronger you become. And people begin to notice, not your stillness, but their unraveling. This is the final reversal. The collapse does not belong to you. It belongs to them. You didn't destroy them. You simply stopped playing. And without your noise, their drama has no stage. That is when the truth cuts deepest. They never missed you. They missed the leash. They never loved you. They loved the power of watching you explain, defend, bend, and break. And now, stripped of it, they are revealed for what they are, powerless. And you, for the first time, are untouchable. Because power is not in the noise. It is not in the rage. It is not in the endless fight to be seen. Power is in the refusal. Power is in the stillness. Power is in the brutal discipline of saying nothing when every nerve inside you wants to scream. They will call you arrogant. They will call you cold. They will say you changed. And you will nod, silently, because it is true. You did change. You buried the version of yourself that lived for their approval. You silenced the version of yourself that begged to be understood. You killed the version of yourself that thought love was proven through suffering. And from that death, You rose into something greater, something no one can predict, something no one can control, something no one can move without your permission. This is the paradox of detachment. It feels like loss, but it is life. It feels like emptiness, but it is clarity. It feels like death, but it is freedom. Because when emotional need is removed, reality reveals itself. Masks fall. Patterns emerge. The machinery of manipulation no longer works because its fuel, your reaction, is gone. What remains is silence. And silence is where power begins. You don't fix anymore. You don't chase anymore. You don't argue anymore. You don't bleed anymore. You watch. You wait. You let people destroy themselves with the choices they swore were yours to blame. And you do the most dangerous thing imaginable. Nothing. And it is in that nothingness that your power sharpens. Because they cannot fight silence. They cannot bend stillness. They cannot control indifference. They scream your name, and it lands in a void. They twist the story, and you remain unmoved. They build their fires, and you watch them burn alone. And the world begins to see, not your reaction, but their desperation. Because the louder they become, the smaller they look. And the quieter you remain, the more infinite you feel. That is the final transformation. You are no longer a puppet. You are no longer prey. You are no longer desperate for recognition, validation, or understanding. You are untouchable. And once you have tasted this kind of freedom, quiet, clean, absolute, no part of you will ever want to go back. Because silence is not the absence of emotion. Silence is the presence of power. And when you finally understand that, nothing and no one can control you again.